Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Kids in Outer Space. Today, I'm very excited. I'm excited every day, but I'm actually excited because we have a 30-year veteran in the transportation field. In the 80s, we have Paul A. Toliver. In the 80s, he was the deputy GM and chief transportation officer at San Francisco Muni. From there, he moved on to King County in Washington, where he was a director of transportation. And finally, he ended his public sector career as a chief operating officer at the Detroit Department of Transportation. He is currently the principal for New Age Industries Consulting, a transportation and technology marketing and consulting firm focusing on establishing and managing relationships for clients with new and emerging technologies. He holds an MBA from University of Cincinnati, Carl H. Linder College of Business. So thank you so much for coming, Paul.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
No, well, I mean, I think that, I've watched you on social media and you are very knowledgeable. So that's kind of why I wanted to have you on, because I feel that it's very important to have people who have been in the field for a long time, because a lot of times if you don't know things that have happened in the past in regards to mistakes, you're doomed to repeat them. So how did you get involved in transportation?
Good question. I think as a young kid, I used to look at the buses and fell in love with the buses and what they did, where they went. And some people accused me when I was a little kid of going through the bus yards and pulling the trolley poles off the wire at night when they were in resting, but I deny that vehemently. But at that point, I guess I got the grease paint and the smoke in my blood. And later on, when I finished college, I got a chance to actually interview with a management company that won a contract to manage the Cincinnati, Ohio transit system. And from that point, I started as a operations planning manager, and did some marketing for the system as well. And from that point, I guess it was history. I've traveled around a lot in order to, move up the ladder, but started in Cincinnati with and deliberately wanting to get in the business to manage transit system. So that's me.
That's a kind of an interesting, that you wanted to manage transit systems. I mean, how was public transit? Like, I know you're from the Midwest. How was, public transit there? I mean, was it efficient? Was it good? I mean, were you more of like one of those train junkies people who just loved trains and loved buses? Or did you view it as more like, oh, this is a great functional way to get from point A to point B? Like, how did you, are you into the hobby industry?
Right. I'm not so much a transit junkie, but I did fall in love with the whole issue of transportation and the industry of transportation. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that I have family. My grandfather was a Pullman porter back in the early 1900s, and I knew him, but he died when I was fairly young. But mm-hmm. Moving on, I took the transit system to school, and that included college every day. So growing up in the city and the inner city of Cincinnati, you transit becomes part of your life. You don't have any money, you don't have a car, and that's how you get around. That was your mobility, your way of living. And that I realized at that point how important public transit was to people who lived in the city, or especially those who didn't have cars. Things that, of course, I saw were men and women who were transit operators, bus drivers. We did not see any people of color in management. That was kind of rare. But I knew I had wanted to do something in the transit system. So I kind of walked in the office one day of the transit system management firm and asked if they were hiring. And they were entry-level management positions. And I started, like I said, in Cincinnati and went on from there. So
Well, that's it's so funny because it's like that kind of generation that you are from. I remember when I moved first to the East Coast, my mom said, "You know what? You want to be a journalist? You should just walk into NBC and tell them you want a job." So I'm like, it must have worked that way at some point. Now, we have one question from the audience, and then we're going to go back to the questions that I have for you. Somebody was asking, I guess Charles is asking, was there any hope of reviving the Cincinnati subway when you were there? This is a question from the audience.
That's a great question. The subway still is there, and there's still talk about trying to revive it. Of course, it would take a few more dollars now just to invest in at least making the subway operable, including making it size right. I think it's kind of small, but there was not any interest when I was there, late 70s and the early 80s. It was more, we went from a private owned bus company. All bus companies were private prior to the early 70s. One or two public ones, including Chicago and maybe New York and Boston, but most of them were still private. So it was private. I was one of the first public employees who worked with the transit system in Cincinnati. And it was all about trying to make the transit system, the bus company, better for those who used it. So no interest in reviving the subway at that point in time.
Okay, that's an interesting. That's an interesting question. I mean, interesting question, an interesting point that bus companies were private before. I know in Los Angeles they said that they were our trains and trolleys were owned by the real estate companies, so they weren't public. But I don't know. We'll move on to that. But so for you as a person of color, as a Black person, and you were in management, was it challenging or not? I mean, you were probably one of the first GMs. I mean, you pretty much worked everywhere. So, I mean, were there any issues or anything, or no?
It was challenging, but if you're crazy enough to say, I want to break into this industry, I was one of the first African-American management personnel in the industry. The first African-American individual who ran a bus company, a transit system, was Curtis Green, who ran San Francisco Muni. And he started there, I think, in the late 60s. And then St. Louis was the second guy was Jim. What was Jim's last name? But those were the two early pioneers. I think I may have been like the third or fourth in the nation, African-American. I ran a little company first, then may not show on my resume, but South Bend, Indiana Public Transit System. And then a small city, but I knew I'd wanted to kind of move on to a larger marketing and community. So I took a job in New Orleans, worked there in the early 80s, and then schemed and connived and pursued a position with the San Francisco Municipal Railway, better known as San Francisco Muni. And that was in the mid 80s. And I was there for a number of years, and then went to Seattle, Washington, where I ran the Seattle transit system. And that was called Seattle Metro. And then that merged with the county government in Seattle, and it became King County Metro. I was kicked upstairs, so to speak, to head the Department of Transportation for the county. And that included the bus company. I think we had about 1,300 buses. It included the roads and highways in the unincorporated part of the county. I was overseeing the county airport and just basic transportation planning. And I did that for 6 years as well. And I left the county, King County, in 2002.
So, I mean, it's interesting. You were in King County, you were in San Francisco. You were in actually quite a few places that now, like, the African American population is gone. When there was like a really kind of a bigger population at one point, and now it's kind of, you live in Florida now, so I heard everybody's moving back to the South. now. I know that you were also the chair of the national, you were the national chair president of the Conference of Minority Transportation. Can you tell me a little bit about that organization and why did you feel, I mean, with all your duties that you already had being GM of all these places, why did you also want to be the president of the Conference of Minority Transportation? Why did you feel that was important and why did they need that agency?
It's good. That's a good question because I took that job in the mid to late 80s. It wasn't a job, as a volunteer position. Mm-hmm. It was a group of individuals who said we need to make some changes in this industry in terms of have more opportunity in terms of jobs, in terms of contract for small and minority businesses. And we needed a voice with those who had made the decision to hire, who made the decision to hire consultants and companies to do business. We knew we needed to be unified. The association started in 1975. First meeting was at Morgan State in Maryland, mm-hmm. in Baltimore. And then that was kind of the original. It was led by two founders who are no longer with us, the Reverend Jerry Moore out of Washington, D.C. Tommy Newsom was the chair of the board of the Los Angeles transportation system. Tommy Newsom was an attorney, very active in the civil rights movements back in the day, and a number of other men and women who got the organization going to be a voice for those days, Black men and women who were seeking positions, better positions, as well as better business opportunities in the transportation industry. I became the chair of that organization in '86, about 30 plus years ago. And our motto then was basic jobs and contracts. How can we do better for those in our industry, both employees as well as those who do business? And my term was up in '88, and I am still a very active member, supporter. It is still a strong organization. We have every major U.S. city with a substantial population of people of color. We have chapters. They're active lobbying the U.S. Congress, active in local and regional levels in terms of trying to get more opportunities for people of color in our industry. So it was commitment for me. I was passionate about trying our best to do better in terms of jobs and contracts.
No, that's, I think that a lot of people don't understand like the importance of contracts, and especially for like small minority business owners and being able to get in there to be able to survive, especially for a lot of professional people. There's only so many jobs in the public sector where a lot of African Americans get hired. So kind of like having that, we spoke with June Grant, and she's an architect, and her quest to trying to get government contracts and things like that. So, thank you for that work that you did in the past and still are doing. You were also on the board for the Minetta Transportation Institute, an organization that research and training unit in the partnership with, I guess, a Lucas College graduate School of Business in San Jose State to increase mobility by improving safety and efficiency, accessibility and convenience in the nation's transportation system. I know that's long, but I was always very into that, the Minetta Transportation Institute, using it as like resources for my writing and things. So can you tell us a little bit about, how did that kind of come about? That was kind of a weird organization. It's useful, but it's a little bit different. They have like a school that you can do urban planning online and all that stuff. And you were part of that. So can you let us know like how that came about?
That was, on the West Coast, of course, centered at San Jose State University. And being on the West Coast most of my professional career for 30 years, either in Seattle, Washington, or either in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland area, I knew most of the transportation people up and down the coast. We all kept in touch with each other. And then I knew some of the, which included the elected officials out of the Bay Area, including Rod Dearden, who at that time was the executive director of the Minetta Institute. And he convinced Norm Minetta, who was a congressman out of San Jose, to lend his name to the creation of this research institute. It's primarily a research entity, but they research what we consider more practical problems as opposed to theoretical problems in terms of transit specifically, and then some other broader transportation, be it highway or some other modes of transportation. But I was convinced and invited to join by Rod Dearden, who was an elected official out of the city of San Jose at one point, and then went on to run the Minetta Institute with San Jose State University. So it was a good match for me because she got to do some new, innovative, and creative things, help people do research. Most of our job, being a board member, ultimately the chair was to select what we wanted to research, make sure we could get funds to the researchers to do that creative work. So that was exciting. We came up with some interesting projects that we hope help a lot of people understand what the industry was about.
Well, yeah, it does. It did help a lot. I know a lot of people who use the San Jose or Minetta, the MTI. They use that as research, and they also use it in regards to the college, that the Masters in Urban Planning that they have there, that you can actually be part of and do it online, which is, I think that you guys are one of the first programs that did that. It's more common now, but I don't think that that's even, that was one of the first schools that kind of did that distance learning. So what was one of the most favorite projects that you oversaw? And I know that you're the more practical guy, like the person has this kind of pie in the sky idea and you make it actually happen. So what was one of your most favorite projects that you oversaw or helped to make happen?
Well, that's another good question. And just for you and a lot of your listeners, and viewers, most of my career has been in the operations arena. We talk about a lot of visionaries like yourself and other people who look at developing where transportation is going in the future. But sooner or later, somebody has to take what has been developed and try to make it work. And people have hired me to come in and help do the basics, make sure you have enough buses, make sure you have enough bus drivers, and make sure you have enough money to actually run the service that people dream up that need to be run. Now, saying that I'm an operations guy, I had a bent toward technology and its role in efficiently operating transit systems. So some of my projects have been around how technology can help. In Seattle, we were fortunate to have a steady funding source back in the 80s. And we did a lot of projects. Some we were maybe on the cutting edge. We actually were the first transit system in North America. I don't know about the rest of the world, but we had the first website for a transit system, King County Metro. We won awards from the Intelligent Transportation Society for real-time information to people's cell phones in terms of what time the next bus was coming. Sure, back in the 80s, that's when it happened. It was a text-based system, but it was in the 90s we won that award, about mid-90s. But it was, you put in your stop number and I'd tell you the next 3 or 4 buses, what time they were going to come through. We were one of the first to use that technology, which is kind of standard now with a lot of transit systems with smartphones and smart apps. So a lot of the projects around technology, we were selected by the federal government to demonstrate new and advanced technologies in the 90s, one of 4 cities, and we were very proud to do that. So the exciting projects that I really had to do with around technology. Now, we did have a groundbreaking project, which I came into Seattle at the end, but I was there when they opened it. That was called the Downtown Seattle Transit Tunnel. If you've ever been to Seattle, it's an underground subway that was for buses only. It was brand new. We opened it in 1988, and all the downtown buses kind of went underground, of course, which saved a lot of time and a lot of congestion and a lot of hassle. as opposed to riding on the surface. Now, this tunnel has since been converted into a rail tunnel for the Seattle Light Rail System, and they do run mixed use. Both buses and trains are using that tunnel now, but it was those days, it was unique. It was only one other city in the world that had an underground system for buses, and that was Moscow. So you had Seattle and Moscow, two cities in the world had a subway for buses. So that was an exciting project, even though I came at the end. And then the other projects had to do with how we use technology, be it the real-time information, to let our customers know when the buses were coming, and real-time information to manage the bus system in terms of where buses went, what time they went, and how effectively they were running. So those are some of my highlights using technology.
I have to say that in Los Angeles we had Next Bus, and I think they probably have that here. That changed my life when I took the bus. I mean, it made it being able to know when the next bus is coming. I mean, it really, for people who take transit, because the schedule is good, but you really can't depend on that. And you can actually plan if you know which buses the bus is going to come in 5 minutes. I can stay here and get my food, or I need to leave right now. I know now we have a lot of car share, like Uber and Lyft, and even like some private companies kind of doing these van things. Do you feel that public transit might be in danger, or is that like a ridiculous thought? Like, because of these kind of car share, people will stop taking the bus or stop taking the train, or what do you think?
Car share is here to stay, no question about it. It's been around for a lot of years, but we didn't call it that. We called it carpooling. This just says, so you had carpools. Now, how can we use this technology coupled with this new thing called cell phone? And now this whole internet technology and wireless technology, put all three together. How can we now provide a more convenient, fast, direct way of moving people? I think transit will be here for a lot longer because there still will be so many people who will need it as their only means of transportation. Now, a lot of those folks cannot afford that Uber, Lyft service, but transit will always be here. What is happening now is that a lot of kind of innovative transit systems are figuring out how to work with the Uber, Lyfts of the world to provide service that where the transit system did not go or had difficulty going because of either operations or cost issues. So the last mile service of people who live in really kind of not so dense populated communities, rural communities, nighttime service, those are places that how they are supplementing mass transit. Now, there are a lot of people who use Uber, Lyft, but they were choice riders of the transit system before, and the transit systems of the country were really kind of struggling. How do we capture more choice riders? So a lot of those riders who went to Uber and Lyft are not necessarily kind of deserting the mass transit system or the public transit system. They are people who we were trying to get and had not been all that successful. But I think there will always be a role for the transit systems as well as the Ubers and the Lyfts as they become more and more. I'm telling people now to keep their eye out for the Uber flying cars, but that's next up.
Well, we have one comment, and someone said, sadly, Newark lost its Cedar Street bus subway when they closed a public service building and demolished it around 1980. But it's great that Seattle built that bus tunnel. That's not really a question; it's just a comment. But that was pretty innovative. So if you were, you being part of that really kind of shows that you were forward thinking. And we got to look out for these. If you're saying look out for the flying cars, then we got to think about that. Now, what do you think in regards to the best transit in the United States? What do you think? Who do you think has the best transportation system in the United States right now?
Well, you've got cities like New York, Chicago, Boston, Washington, D.C. that need that transit system in order to survive. If they didn't have the mass transit, those cities would break up. Now, that doesn't mean they're the best going. It's just that they are there and basically have no choice. Washington, D.C. is a great system. Came on board in the 70s, I think. Now New York and Chicago have been around for a while. San Francisco has been around for a long time. It's a highly dense city that needs a mass transit system. I think, however, cities, I'm going to give the BART system as one of the best rail systems in the country. That's out of San Francisco. It serves a number of different counties out there. And I'm going to give Seattle a rate them high for a great bus system.
Mm-hmm.
The buses as opposed to the train. Now you have DC for its rail system, the heavy rail system. You got to give that, and I get to give the San Francisco Muni, regards to its buses moving 700,000 people in 7 square miles of 49 square miles of city with so many people. Moving them efficiently through San Francisco is tremendous. So a lot of the West Coast systems, maybe I'm biased, but I still think Washington, D.C. and New York and Boston, Chicago, they're great and they're necessary. And I think with more investments, they're going to be on top and continue to stay on top. But, right now, some of the new innovative stuff, I think is the West Coast is leading the nation.
Well, that's good. I mean, I know we had Carla used to have the bus chick, and I remember her experiences taking the bus did not sound nearly as miserable as my experience riding about the bus in Los Angeles. So apparently, maybe you're correct that the bus system there is something that people should be looking at in regards to how can you make the bus not a miserable experience. So especially for people who are choice riders who have a choice, how can you make them kind of choose the bus? Just to close up, because you gave us all this great information, what advice would you give people going into the transportation industry today? Like what would you, anything that you could give advice that you would give people?
The transportation industry is a good industry to look at as to make a career, and especially mass transit. There's more there than just driving a bus or fixing a bus, a mechanic. There are a lot of professional positions, administrative positions, management positions that I think you should definitely put on your list when you look around for a career. You need the same education that you would if you're going to Procter & Gamble or Wall Street. But let's put it on the list because they do pay competitive salaries. The jobs are very meaningful. You're fulfilling positions. Be open-minded. It is a industry today that I think has few more open arms for people of color, more welcoming than some other more traditional non-public industries. But I think everyone should, if you're interested in public service, helping people, the transportation industry is a great place to look.
Yeah, I have to say that you have given the most practical. You're the most practical interview I've ever had. So people are going to actually look at this and go, okay, this is something I should do with my life and be able to take notes and all this stuff. So thank you so much, Paul, for coming to Black Kids in Outer Space. We appreciate the work that you continue to do with New Age Industries Consulting, and we appreciate the work that you've done in the past. So thank you very much, and thank you those who watched our show today.
Thank you.
Okay. Black Kids in Outer Space. Black Kids in Outer Space. Black Kids in Outer Space. Urban planning, walking, bicycling, and more in our space.